The self-improvement industry is now worth over $20 billion. And it has one problem it will never tell you about. The moment you actually improve, you stop paying. It sounds contradictory, but this is how the system works. From coaching apps to morning routines to $5,000 masterclasses, the business model doesn't just fail to fix you. It depends entirely on you remaining unfixed. Because in a subscription economy, a customer who feels complete is a customer who cancels. In this episode, we'll investigate how self-improvement became an industry, how that industry learned to manufacture the feeling of inadequacy, keep you psychologically subscribed, and turn your honest desire to get better into a revenue loop that never ends. By the end, you'll understand why the harder you try to optimize yourself, the more broken you feel, and why it's not your fault, but a feature of the industry itself. Let's start with what the industry looks like from the outside. Because from the outside, it looks wonderful. You wake up, you open a podcast. A founder who built a company from nothing sits across from a host and tells you their formula. Wake up early, read more, cultivate discipline. Here are the 7 habits, the 12 rules, and the 33 laws. It sounds empowering. It may even sound like someone is finally handing you the manual for life. And millions of people feel that way. The global coaching industry hit $20 billion in 2024, and it's still accelerating. The online coaching segment alone was valued at $3.2 billion in 2022 and is forecast to reach nearly $12 billion by 2032, growing at 14% annually. AI coaching avatars are projected to grow even faster, 27% per year through the same period. It has evolved beyond a small-scale cottage industry to become a vast industrial machine. And here's a telling detail. The actual revenue generated by human coaching practitioners sits at around $5.3 billion. The global market is valued at $20 billion, which means the majority of the industry's value is now held by platform aggregators, tech providers, and high-ticket marketing firms, not the people doing the coaching. The infrastructure has outgrown the service, and machines have an operating logic. And to be clear, self-improvement isn't inherently bad. Therapy and coaching genuinely help people. A good book at the right time can genuinely change a life. Nobody here is arguing that the desire to grow is the problem. The desire is real. But when a real desire meets an industrial business model, something shifts. The question stops being, how do we help this person get better? And becomes, how do we keep this person subscribed? Here's the operating logic. It runs on recurring revenue. A few decades ago, the industry was mostly books and tapes. You bought a product, you consumed it, and the transaction was over. But the modern version runs on subscriptions, memberships, app-based habit trackers, and tiered coaching programs. Recurring revenue gives companies predictable income and project stability to investors. It's good business, but it creates a very specific structural incentive. In a subscription model, a customer who is fixed is a customer who churns. They leave, they cancel, they stop paying. So the system has a built-in reason to never fully solve the problem it sells the solution to. That sounds cynical, but the evidence says it's structural, not a conspiracy. No one needs to sit in a room and decide to keep you broken. The financial architecture does it by itself, and it does it through a psychological mechanism so elegant that most people don't notice it's happening. In the 1980s, a psychologist named Daniel Wegner discovered something that should probably change how you think about every self-help product you've ever used. He called it the ironic process theory. Here's the short version. When you try to control your thoughts, 2 mental processes kick in at the same time. The first is an intentional operating process. It searches for what you want to think and feel. It looks for the desired state. The second is an ironic monitoring process. It runs in the background, scanning for signs that you're failing. It searches for the exact thing you're trying to avoid. Under normal conditions, the intentional process is stronger. You can steer your attention, but under stress, fatigue, time pressure, or mental overload, conditions that basically describe modern life, the intentional process weakens, and the monitor keeps running. Here's where it gets bad. Because the monitor is specifically looking for signs of failure, it increases the accessibility of those failure signals to your conscious mind. It pulls the unwanted thoughts closer to the surface. The harder you try to suppress anxiety, the more anxious you become. The harder you try to be happy under pressure, the sadder you feel. The more you try to relax, the more your body tightens. Wegner's research documented this across multiple domains. Deliberate efforts to restrict eating made people more susceptible to binging when their self-regulation was under load. Attempts to escape a negative mood by seeking pleasant memories actually sensitized people to the bad mood they were trying to leave behind. The pattern was consistent. Attempting to control the mental state only amplified the state being controlled. Now think about what the self-improvement industry asks you to do every single day. Monitor yourself. Track your habits, audit your productivity, evaluate your mindset, rate your mood, measure your progress. Every one of those actions activates the ironic monitor. Every self-tracking tool, journaling prompt, morning routine checklist, and app that asks, "How are you feeling today?" directs your attention toward the gap between where you are and where you should be. And the monitor's job is to find that gap, to notice every failure, to keep the feeling of inadequacy right at the surface of your awareness. The industry calls this self-awareness, but what it actually creates is a salience paradox. The more you try to fix yourself, the more broken you feel. You aren't actually getting worse, but you have trained part of your brain to search for evidence that you are failing, and it's very good at its job. This is the engine, and it's not just theoretical. Effective neuroscience research shows that emotional suppression and hypermonitoring increase activity in the prefrontal cortex, while often failing to reduce or even increasing activation in the amygdala, the brain's emotional distress center. In plain terms, the effort to control the feeling doesn't quiet the alarm system. It keeps the alarm ringing louder. The industry didn't invent this mechanism, but it learned to exploit it. Now, there's a reason the feeling never goes away, and it's built into the ideas the industry sells, not just the products. Take the concept of growth mindset. On the surface, it sounds healthy. The belief that intelligence and ability can be developed through effort rather than being fixed at birth. It's framed as the opposite of a limiting belief. However, academic analysis reveals a different reality regarding the practical functioning of this construct. Researchers have argued that growth mindset, alongside related constructs like grit and lifelong learning, works to normalize a very specific kind of selfhood. One where you're expected to view your own identity as an internal, knowable, calculable set of skills that can be strategically managed and improved. That sounds empowering until you notice what it requires: a constant assessment of personal incompleteness. You have to believe you're unfinished. That's the prerequisite. And here's the problem. Real completion is fundamentally misaligned with the industry's business model. A person who feels whole, content, and sufficient doesn't buy the next course, download the next app, or subscribe to the next framework. Content individuals do not align with the values of productivity and consumption that sustain revenue. So the system has to keep manufacturing new gaps, new insecurities, new ways of making your effort feel inadequate. You fixed your morning routine? Great, now optimize your sleep. You optimized your sleep, now work on your gut health. Your gut health is fine. Have you considered your dopamine regulation, your emotional intelligence, your attachment style? The conveyor belt never stops, and it was never designed to. Cultural theorist Lauren Berlant had a name for this condition. She called it cruel optimism. It describes a state where people cling to the fantasy of the good life, health, wealth, completion, even though the very pursuit of that fantasy through commodified self-improvement is itself the source of the harm. The desire for the thing keeps you in the system that prevents you from getting it. And the industry profits from the resulting exhaustion, because every moment of burnout creates a new opportunity to sell a coping mechanism. So far, we've talked about the psychological engine and the ideological framework. But there's a third layer, and it's the most deliberately engineered of all. It's the behavioral design. Modern self-improvement platforms are built using a model called the hook model. It has 4 stages: trigger, action, variable reward, and investment. Stage 1 is the trigger. It can be external, a push notification, an email, or a reminder. Alternatively, it can be internal, meaning a feeling: boredom, inadequacy, guilt about yesterday's missed workout. The goal over time is to move the user from needing external triggers to being driven by internal ones. Once you experience guilt every time you skip a meditation session, the app will no longer need to remind you. Your own psychology does the work. Stage 2 is the action. It's designed to be as frictionless as possible. Tap a button, check in, log one thing. The lower the effort, the more likely you are to do it. Stage 3 is the variable reward. This concept is borrowed directly from behavioral psychology. Predictable rewards lose their motivational power over time. But unpredictable ones, such as surprise badges, social likes, unlocked content, and leaderboard jumps, keep the brain's reinforcement system engaged. The dopamine isn't about pleasure, it's about anticipation, about the possibility that this time the reward will hit. Stage 4 is the investment. The user does some form of work that makes the product harder to leave. Entering data, building a streak, customizing a profile. The more you invest, the higher the switching cost. Walking away means losing everything you built. And then the cycle begins again. The streaks mechanic deserves special attention because it reveals exactly how this works on a psychological level. According to studies, users who maintain a 7-day streak are over 3 times more likely to finish a course. That sounds like engagement, but it also produces something called streak anxiety, and 73% of users report experiencing it. The fear of losing the streak becomes more powerful than the desire for the activity itself. This is loss aversion in action. The terror of watching a 100-day streak disappear overrides the question of whether the activity is even helping you anymore. And when a streak does break, 61% of users quit the app entirely within 3 days. They weren't driven by genuine interest. The streak itself was the sole motivation. Once it's gone, there's nothing left but the feeling of failure, which tells you everything about what was really being built, not a habit, a dependency. Platforms know this. They use urgency indicators, countdown timers, and what UX designers call dark patterns to shame users into returning. Messages like, "Are you really going to give up now?" are not motivational. They are retention tools designed to exploit the psychological cost of quitting. The goal of all of this is something called an internal trigger lock-in. Once the user's own feelings of inadequacy become the trigger that drives them back to the app, they're captured. And captured users don't churn. They stay subscribed and keep paying. If psychology is the engine and design is the chassis, the business model shows the destination. And for many people, that destination is an empty bank account. In December 2023, the Federal Trade Commission sued the operators of an income coaching scheme called the Sales Mentor based in Tennessee. The company had promised customers high-demand telemarketing incomes of $10,000 to $20,000 a month. Ads claimed it was, and this is their language, virtually impossible not to enjoy a job-replacing 6-figure income. They said they'd helped over 25,000 people find life-changing results. The FTC found that between 2018 and 2022, the defendants defrauded consumers of more than $29 million. The packages ranged from $97 to over $9,000. Customers who paid for private mentoring found it was unavailable. Those in higher pricing tiers often received the exact same video series as those who paid the lowest price. The waiting list of companies eager to hire graduates turned out to be an outdated list of general job openings. The settlement in 2025 included just over $960,000 in refunds distributed to over 8,000 consumers. That's a recovery rate of roughly 3%. The total judgment was $16.3 million, but it was largely suspended because the defendants claimed an inability to pay. $29 million taken, $960,000 returned. The numbers speak for itself, and that case is small compared to what the FTC found at Ivy Capital. Ivy Capital took well over $100 million from financially strapped consumers who were looking to start online businesses. They charged between $2,000 and $20,000 for coaching that provided very little in return. They failed to honor their refund policies. They required consumers to sign confidentiality agreements or agree not to publicly criticize the company as a condition for getting any money back. And they targeted their highest-pressure telemarketing at the people who could least afford it. The resulting judgment was $130 million. The defendants were permanently banned from selling business coaching and were required to surrender luxury assets, including multiple homes, a Range Rover, and a Porsche Panamera. These aren't fringe operations. This is the high-ticket coaching industry. And the FTC has an entire consumer advisory page dedicated to warning people about it, because the pattern keeps repeating. It doesn't always look like a scam. Sometimes it looks like enlightenment. Take the Jay Shetty Certification School. Shetty built his brand on a narrative of spiritual transformation. A former monk, a man who left the material world, found wisdom, and came back to share it. The school offers what it calls a postgraduate diploma at level 7. That's the UK's equivalent of a master's level qualification language, and it will run you roughly $7,400. But when The Guardian investigated, the picture cracked. The school's brochure claimed its qualifications were approved and regulated by Ofqual, the UK's official exam regulator. Ofqual told investigators directly, they do not recognize Jay Shetty, and the qualifications are not Ofqual regulated. Marketing materials claimed that completing the program would allow students to progress to top-up degrees or MBAs at universities, including the University of Chichester and the University of Derby. Every listed university denied having any formal partnership with the school. And Shetty's own origin story, the spiritual turning point, the years spent as a monk in a remote Indian ashram, was contradicted by records showing he was active in his movement in London well before the claimed transformative moment. According to the investigation, he spent less than 4 months in India in 2010. The brand says years. The records say weeks. This is what researchers call accreditation laundering. You take a non-regulated program, wrap it in the language of formal academic credentials, and use that framing to justify a price tag that would make an actual university blush. And it works because the aesthetic of spiritual authority short-circuits the consumer's due diligence. You don't fact-check a guru, you trust them. And oddly, the school continues to operate. Now, there's the layer where self-improvement stops being a consumer product and becomes a corporate infrastructure. BetterUp markets what it calls human transformation as a service. It integrates mindfulness and coaching into corporate workplace wellness programs, selling to clients like Chevron, Chipotle, and Microsoft. Its SEC filings reveal a business model built on a blank check merger strategy designed for rapid scaling. The company claims a 146% increase in productivity and a 63% reduction in involuntary attrition for its clients. On paper, this sounds progressive. In practice, it shifts the burden of care onto the individual employee. You're burnt out? Here's a coaching session. The workload that caused the burnout stays the same. The system that created the pressure remains untouched. But now the company can point to its wellness program and say it's doing something. The employee absorbs the cost, the company absorbs the credit, the platform absorbs the revenue. This pattern extends into the financial sector. In the lawsuit Greco versus Maluk, plaintiffs allege that motivational figure Tony Robbins and creative planning engaged in a scheme involving conflicts of interest, mishandled client funds, and retaliation against employees who raised concerns. The complaint described a silencing and retaliation scheme targeting whistleblowers. Whether those allegations are ultimately proven in court, they reflect a recurring dynamic. When motivational authority merges with financial products, questioning the system becomes professionally dangerous. Pull all of this back far enough and a larger picture comes into focus. The wellness industry, valued at billions, operates through what academics describe as a semiotics of exclusion. Wellness is packaged as a luxury aesthetic: expensive supplements, exclusive retreats, clean beauty, organic everything. The message is that health is a status marker, and if you can't afford the right version of it, the implication is that you're not just unhealthy, you're undisciplined. Experts studying wellness apps like meditation platforms have identified what they call a disembodied form of default whiteness encoded into their design. These apps present well-being as a fundamentally apolitical project. They take practices like mindfulness, strip away the cultural and community context they originated from, and repackage them for affluent consumers. The focus on individual self-care draws attention away from systemic problems like food deserts, unaffordable healthcare, and communities shaped by decades of disinvestment, and reframes those structural failures as matters of personal choice. Can't afford organic food? Should have budgeted better. Burnt out from working 2 jobs? Should have set better boundaries? Can't sleep? There's an app for that. It only costs $9.99 a month. This is the final layer of the machine. The self-improvement industry doesn't just sell you a product, it sells you a worldview, one where every systemic failure is reframed as a personal deficiency, where the answer to every structural problem is individual optimization, where the obstacle between you and the life you desire is never external factors like policy, wages, housing costs, or the way your city is designed, the things simply beyond your control. It's your mindset. And that worldview has a name: responsibilization, the process by which collective problems are reclassified as individual ones. It works by making you feel that your struggle is yours alone. That if you just found the right framework, the right coach, or the right morning routine, you could solve it. And when you can't solve it, because it was never an individual problem to begin with, the only conclusion is that something is wrong with you, which is exactly the feeling that sends you back to the app, back to the course, back to the podcast, back to the subscription. The loop closes. This is a reality that most of this industry will never openly acknowledge, as revealing it would dismantle the existing business model instantly. You are not a product to be optimized. Your feeling of inadequacy, that persistent, low-grade hum that follows you through self-help books, is not evidence of failure. It's evidence of a system that needs your failure to keep running. The ironic monitor is still scanning, still searching for the gap. And every app, every course, every guru who tells you they can close that gap is also the one who keeps it open. Because the moment you feel whole, you walk away. And they can't afford for you to walk away. None of this means that growth isn't real. People do change. People do heal. A good therapist, a genuine mentor, a community that sees you clearly, those things matter. But they tend to have something in common. They want you to eventually not need them. The industrial version of self-improvement wants the opposite. It needs you back tomorrow, and the day after that, and the month after that. Real growth doesn't come with a subscription fee. It doesn't require a streak or a leaderboard or a push notification reminding you that you haven't journaled today. It doesn't fit inside a framework, and it doesn't follow 33 laws. Sometimes it looks like putting the phone down. Sometimes it looks like not tracking anything at all. Sometimes the most radical act of self-improvement is refusing to treat yourself as something that needs to be fixed. The industry built a $20 billion machine on the promise that you're broken and they've got the glue. But the machine only works if you believe the first part. And now you know how the machine works. But the machine didn't stop at your mindset. It found an even more vulnerable target: your face. How a rating system built in incel forums became a billion-view pipeline, selling teenagers the idea that their bone structure determines their worth. That episode is here.